if I'd had a vision in my mind of being full-time property development, it was never clear enough to know what exactly it would look like from a financial perspective. I just knew that it had to be supported.
You are listening to the Property Developer Podcast, your home for tips, ideas, and inspiration to help take your developing to the next level. Now here's your host, Justin Getty.
Hello and welcome to episode 101 of the Property Developer Podcast. Thanks for joining me. How are you doing? Going well? I'm doing great, thanks. Had a busy couple of weeks. Got quite a bit done, which is always nice. Starting to bunker down for winter here in Melbourne. Weather has been strange this week. We've had sunny, warm weather and then now freezing cold, wet weather. I think there's more cold, wet weather ahead than behind us. So anyway, got another great show coming up for you today. Got a terrific guest talking about how he made the transition from small-scale developer into full-time property developer. I'm sure there's a lot of you that are going to love that chat because there's lots of awesome information in there. Before we get to that, here's a quick project update about what I've been up to on my Cambridge Road project. I was just out there today and it's nice to see that the scaffolding has come down on 8 of the 14 townhouses. So we can now see the design shining through, which is great. They've also started putting in the kitchen cabinetry, which is nice. And they've put the roofing on the front 6 townhouses. So that's been good. Now they're working on putting the cladding on at the front and working towards finishing off the lock-up stage for the back 8. So things are moving along nicely on that project. On my other project, we finished the advertising period with only a few objections, thankfully. Quite happy about that. So fingers crossed for getting a permit from here without too many hassles or complications, although you never know until the stamped permit has arrived. And I've been busy doing some initial groundwork for the post-permit phase so that we can really hit the ground running when the permit comes through. So there's been a lot I've had to do there in terms of getting in touch with suppliers and contractors and finding out all sorts of information that I haven't had to do before. So that's been good and I'm looking forward to getting that project going. Okay, a couple of quick promo announcements before we get to our guest. The first one for the property developer training. I'm very excited to announce that I've added some new training inside that course. This one is on capital raising. And I put that together because I know that raising money is often an issue that people face or that they're interested in. And if you want to do bigger and more projects, then raising capital is something that you're going to have to do. So I put that training together to help people understand what's involved in raising capital. So in the course, I cover off how you work out how much cash you're going to need to start and finish a project and when during the project you might need cash. We look at debt and equity, what's the difference and which one is the right one to use. We look at the legal considerations for when you're raising money. We cover off investment proposals and how you can pull together an effective investment proposal for prospective investors. We talk about where you can actually find investors and a whole lot more. So there's heaps of awesome content and information in that training. Now, if you are a member of the property developer training, that's awesome because you'll have access to this as part of your membership. If you would like to get access, then head over to propertydevelopertraining.com and check out all the things that are included inside the training, including the property developer training, which is my step-by-step process for doing a small-scale property development. There's also the Taking It to the Next Level course, which focuses on what you can do if you want to become a full-time developer. There's also the social wall where I post things about what's happening in the development world. And of course, the forum, which is the area where you can ask questions and have questions answered. So there's heaps of awesome stuff inside the training. I'd love to see you in there. I hang out in there all the time, so it'd be great to see you there. And don't forget to pick up a copy of my book, Become $1 Million Property Developer, An Insider's Guide to Wealth, Fulfillment and Glory. You can pick that up at propertydeveloperpodcast.com/book if you want to find out a bit more about the lessons I've learned along the way. And finally, a quick shout out for the quiz. If you want to find out how ready you might be to become a developer, head over to propertydevelopertraining.com/quiz and take the free quiz. It's been a while since I've given the socials a bit of a plug, so if you want to see what my projects look like and how they're tracking, you can head over to Instagram or Facebook. I just posted some good footage this week, some aerial footage of how the site is looking. So jump over there if you want to catch me on the socials. I also put out a video version of each episode on YouTube. So if you want to see what I look like or what the guests look like and how we interact with each other, then jump over to YouTube under Property Developer Podcast and you can see us there. And one final request, it's been a while since I've made an ask for reviews. So if you're feeling generous, jump over onto iTunes and give the show a review. It's a great way of helping other people find the show. Okay, on to today's guest, Nolan Keenan from Aveline Property. Nolan has gone from starting out as a real estate agent before working in IT and then recently becoming a full-time property developer. Nolan shares with us his story of progressing from a simple splitter project to now managing multiple medium density projects and setting his sights on going to even higher levels. In this conversation, we cover why he decided to do his first project in another state, how planning delayed his next project, and a really fantastic discussion about how you can transition into becoming a full-time property developer, which I know many listeners out there want to do. So be sure to listen out for Nolan's one key thing to understand before you jump into developing full-time. I'm sure you will love this chat because I really enjoyed it. So let's get stuck in by finding out what Nolan would eat until he was sick.
It's changed a few times over the years, actually, but I'm going to take the recent one is blueberry yogurt. It's I found a really great brand and I can't get enough of it, and I do actually eat more than I should, so it would be that.
Yeah, well, I can imagine eating too much yogurt would make you feel quite sick.
Yeah, you don't need to eat that much to feel sick, actually.
Well, it's sort of good for you in a way, but then bad for you when you're eating that much of it that makes you feel sick.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, hopefully your guts are good for all the nutrients that are going into it from the yogurt. So
overdosing on probiotics.
Yes. Now, we're here today to talk about property and your developing journey. You've got an interesting story to tell in that you've transformed into a full-time developer, which I know a lot of listeners will be really interested to hear about how you made that journey from fledgling developer across into full-time, and we'll get to that. But can you give us a bit of an idea of, well, first off, how you got into property, and then we'll start talking about some of your projects.
Yeah, absolutely, Justin. So I've always loved property. I know I've heard a lot of people say that over the years. I love property. I'm passionate about property. I've heard those words come out of many people's mouths, but and I'm going to say to myself, I am. I started in property as an estate agent from an employment perspective in the 80s. And I worked as an estate agent for around about 6 years before embarking on a different career. But over the years with property, I've had investment properties. I've obviously had my own houses and apartments from a primary place of residence perspective, a home, and yeah, it's sort of been a theme of my entire life, really. Yeah.
How did you get into becoming an agent?
Well, you go to school and you either leave school at 16 in England or you go and do A levels or a national diploma. I did a national diploma in business and finance, and I just couldn't see myself working in sort of admin type roles, or the other option was to join the armed forces, which where I grew up in a town in Herefordshire was quite a sort of strong theme as well for employment. Um, and I love talking to people. And so I kind of naturally gravitated towards sales. And not that I was specifically looking to be an estate agent, but it just came about in the sense of I wanted to be in a customer facing role, if you want to say. And that's the one that just sort of popped out of all the other ones I was looking at.
And so what are the things that you learned or discovered being an agent for 6 years?
I had well, I wouldn't call it unique necessarily, but I wasn't a pushy salesman. So I think that I think with negotiation, it's interesting. People don't want to feel pressured. People don't want to feel like they are being pushed into a corner necessarily. And I've seen salespeople do that over the course of my career. That's not my style. One of the things that I did find curious during that 6 years was that actually it's not curious. It's kind of, it makes sense when you think about it, but people don't always know what they're looking for. So they would walk into my office and they would say, I'm looking for a 3-bedroom house with 2 bathrooms and a double garage and blah, blah, blah. Right. And you go, okay, well, look, I'll see if I can find you one of those. On occasion, I would take people to something which was quite different to what they described in their mind. And I would say most of the time they would latch onto it and kind of, they'd be like, well, I didn't even realize I'd like this, So it's quite interesting how people have an idea in their minds of what they want from a property perspective. But when they see something else, it actually prompts a different response that's quite favorable, which is interesting.
And then did you do any developing then, or is this something that came later? What happened after the real estate gig?
Yeah, no, I didn't do any development for a number of years, and my first development wasn't until about 6 years ago now, 7 years ago. I went into property investment, as in building an investment portfolio, before I got into development. So development's definitely more recent, much more recent. Yeah.
I think you mentioned you ended up in an IT type role.
Yeah, I've been in technology for 25 years. After I left the estate agents, I went back and did a degree in systems analysis in Bristol, at University in Bristol. And I graduated in 98 and went straight into a technology project management career, which is where I've been until literally a month or so ago.
So another Bristol graduate.
Yeah. Love Bristol, love Brizzle. That's good.
And tell us about the investing, the property investing. What was your first property that you purchased?
From an investment perspective, I bought a smallish 3-bedroomed unit in a strata development in St Mary's, Western Sydney, and I bought probably half a dozen investment properties in a very, very short space of time at that point in time. But that was the first investment property I bought to rent out as a lettable property. Yeah.
And then tell us about moving into developing.
Yeah, that's always a good question, isn't it? Because everyone's got a unique journey there. For me, it's really about with the investment properties, I would start to look at the growth over a period of time, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot to be said for buy and hold. right? It's not that I'm saying it's not a good idea, because it's definitely absolutely a strong part of anyone's strategy. But for me at the time, I'm quite impatient. And I was kind of looking at it, and I was looking at the numbers, and I was looking at the time frames, and I was kind of like, what am I going to do while these places are growing in value over the next 15, 25 years? And I started feeling a bit sort of like, okay, I need to accelerate that a bit. And that's kind of how the jump into development came about. It wasn't a jump, it was a gradual move, but it was kind of like, okay, what else is there around property that's faster? And it didn't take long to sort of go down that path of property development, and started doing some education and what have you along that path. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about. I'm through my impatience, really.
And the first project, what did that look like?
The first project was 2 dual occupancies that I designed myself on a splitter block in southeast Queensland, in Logan. I bought the block with the help of a buyer's agent. I was working full time at the time, and my job was quite intensive. So but I worked very closely with the buyer's agent, because part of my approach to everything is learn as much as you can from everyone you work with. So I worked very closely with him to understand what his sort of value prop was to find me a property, and he identified a few in and around Logan Council. We landed on this one, and I ended up building two dual occupancies, 3-bed, 1 unit in each one. And I basically drew the design myself from a few things I saw on Google, took it to a builder and said, can you build this? And they said, yeah, pretty much, a few tweaks, and we're off to the races, kind of thing. So that was the first development, 2 dual occupancies on a 800 square meter splitter block.
So that's 4 dwellings in total?
It was two dwellings, but 4 dwellings, yeah, if you look at the each 1 unit and 2 units in each one. Yeah.
And were you based in Sydney at the time?
Yeah, I've always lived in Sydney.
So yeah, that's pretty courageous to take on your first development in a different state.
Yeah, now I know that.
Yeah, what was the thinking behind that?
There wasn't much thinking behind it, to be honest with you. It was more about, it wasn't to do with the geographical location. It was more about the price point. So I wanted to do the first development out of my own funding. I'd started to get a bit of education around using other people's money, but very, very basic and very early days in that regard. But I still wanted to do it under my own steam, so to speak, because it was really to serve a few purposes. It was to see if I enjoyed it, first of all, see if I enjoyed the process and going through that motion. I didn't want to be tied to anyone and have to answer to anyone because of that, because it was more of an education as much as anything. Obviously, I wanted to make a profit as well. That was, one of the key reasons. I didn't want to lose any money, for sure. I'd be actually quite happy if I'd come out even to learn. But I did make a profit, which was great. So geographically, wasn't too much of an issue. I was going up to Brisbane relatively frequently anyway in my day job. So I used to just hitch on a car hire and drive down quite regularly and see what was going on anyway. But I also made sure that I had a project manager with the builder, actually a supervisor, but someone who was actually overseeing the trades and working in an organized way. Yeah.
That was someone you employed directly, or someone the builder had that you paid to have on-site extra?
The builder. And it was actually part of their service. I only went to builders who had that capability.
Of a site supervisor?
Yeah.
So they weren't there full time, were they? Or
no. The supervisor we had I think 4 or 5 other projects split around the area between him. So he wasn't there full time, but yeah, he did a great job. He was very communicative. He was very he obviously very knowledgeable in what he in his trade, in his experience, and seemed to work well with all the trades that we were using as well. So yeah, again, probably 50% good luck and 50% design in terms of this unraveling the way it did, but it went well. Yeah.
And what key challenges or things did you learn from that project? Was there anything that didn't quite go to plan, or was it all plain sailing?
When have you ever heard a project that's all plain sailing, Justin?
Well, I'm always willing to hear about it.
Not all plain sailing, no. The main issue of all the perhaps little bumps in the road that we found along the way, probably the biggest issue was the sewer. And we needed to connect to a sewer line that was in the neighbor's property behind us. And without going into all the detail, we started looking at options and what have you, because the neighbor wasn't responding. It was a rental property, couldn't get hold of them, time was ticking, usual sorts of dynamics that are at play. And so we started looking at options. How can we push the waste the other way? And of course, then you start talking about hydraulics and expensive solutions. And what little profit I took out of the project, I was just sort of doing these calculations and seeing it all getting wiped off the bottom line. And fortunately, we did resolve it in the end. We did manage to connect with the owner, and we were able to tap into that. But it was very touch and go. And being the first sort of property related issue that I'd really come across, main issue, it was an interesting one from a problem solving perspective, because as a project manager, I've always looked at, first and foremost, how do you solve a problem? You get a problem, how do you solve it? Let's do a post-mortem afterwards, but let's just solve the problem now. So it was interesting to go through that process, a learning curve.
And so did you sell all that stock?
Yeah, I kept it for a while. I kept them both for a while. I sold one, and then I sold the other one probably about 2 years after the first one I sold. Yeah. So they were good yields. They were nearly 7% yields. So they were quite strong. But for me, it was a little bit of a painful experience from a tenant perspective, in terms of just, I think it's a grey area personally, but it is a particular demographic, and you will get a particular tenant, and you do have to face that fact. It's a reality. And we had a few issues with that. And so, I just decided they were not the properties for me to keep in my portfolio. So I let them go. Yeah.
Yes. Is it Bogans from Logan, I think, is what it's known for.
I wasn't going to say that, but I've heard that. Yeah. And now I've heard it again.
That's all right. I grew up in Southeast Queensland, so I'm very familiar with those kind of areas in Logan. So that's okay. Apologies to any listeners from the Logan area.
You've clearly got license to be able to say that. I don't.
Let's quickly move along to your next project. What happened? What was number 2?
Yeah, number 2 is what's finishing up at the moment, actually, which is a 5 townhouse in Newcastle, in Stockton, in Newcastle, which is a beachside location. We're 1 block back from the beach. It was a 1,012 square meter block, normal quarter acre, and R2 zoning. But yeah, we got 5 on it, in a sort of duplex, parking space triplex format, with a driveway going down the long boundary. So literally, we're in the settlement process right now with that, aiming to have settlements completed by the 24th of April.
Well, that's exciting. It's always great when you can see the finish line in sight and the bank balance might get into the positive territory for a change.
Momentarily, yeah.
Tell us about how you selected that area, or how come you decided to go closer to home?
Well, yeah, that was a conscious decision now in terms of bringing it a bit closer to home, because again, even though it wasn't too much of a challenge for me at the time with Queensland, I did want to have the next developments as being within driving distance to be able to get to them. So that was one of the aspects. I sort of look at, I've got a roughly 3 hour radius around Sydney, from Sydney where I live, of where I'd be prepared to go, and that's kind of my target zone, if you like. This particular property itself, in terms of the site, I was looking all over Newcastle at the time. A property came up that was on market, which we made an offer on. When I say we, I mean myself and 2 JV partners who had agreed to do a project with me. That didn't come to fruition, but I'd already done a letter drop in the area, and I got a call from another property not far from that one, on the same size block. So we'd done all the numbers. So when I spoke to the owner and he said to me, "This is what I want," it was a very quick kind of, we can do that, because I already had the numbers there in front of me. So we ended up getting a site from a letter drop. We on a 7-month delayed settlement. We were aiming to get DA in that time. Didn't quite work out that way. And yeah, that's the location was just fantastic in terms of Stockton Beach, and it's a great little suburb. So yeah, it was a good find.
And how'd you go through planning?
Well, as you know, Justin, and many people who listen to this who've gone through the same process, you just never know what's going to happen with a DA, do you? And it doesn't matter how much you think you've designed it within the constraints of what it is that council are looking for. There'll always be something or multiple things. So we got an RFI after a few months with, from memory, I think it was about 12 items, I think, something like that, maybe more. Some of them were pretty straightforward, some of them not so much. And so that takes time. So by the time we'd sort of gone through that process of responding to the RFI, going back into council, the initial assessment officer was then replaced by another assessment officer. And yeah, it's kind of like, just throw it at us. Come on, we're ready. So what should have taken, we thought, maybe 4 or 5 months, that our architect had seen similar DAs take, actually ended up taking 8 months. And to be honest with you, I didn't even think it was going to take 8 months at some point.
Well, to me, that even sounds pretty good. 8 months.
Exactly. We know now, in today's environment, it is pretty good, But yeah.
Any other challenges or interesting things that happened along the way in that project?
Yeah, there's been a few. It's interesting. I'd say the homeowner's warranty insurance threw a curveball. We went through a non-bank lending path for this project, and the homeowner's warranty, they wanted us to provide very detailed information from our lender. Now our lender, is not your traditional bank in that sense. So, the investors who are putting money into them, were just a flat no. We're not going to give you any more information. You've got what you need. So there was a delay in that of probably around about a month or so. We eventually arrived at a solution where we got the lender to park the money for the build in an account, a named account in the name of the project, so the insurance company could see that the funds were there to complete the build, which is what their concern was. So that was an interesting.
Doesn't the builder take out home warranty insurance?
Yes, that's right. But this is the process we went through, and again, in the quest for solving problems, some of the questions that you would ordinarily ask in a light-hearted conversation that always pop into your head anyway, you just don't even have time to even ask those questions. You're just trying to rally to respond, So absolutely, it is the builder, but this is what the insurance company wanted. So.
And how'd you go through construction? Because you would have been building during COVID lockdowns and material disruptions.
Yeah.
Any delays or issues there?
Yeah, a few minor ones, but the biggest one was bricklayers. And we had about a 5-week delay with bricklayers not being able to get a bricklaying team. And I've got to say this: the builder we used was absolutely amazing. I think we couldn't have chosen a better builder in terms of communication, in terms of their focus on solving problems, and then not just solving problems, but also trying to find a way back to the critical path in terms of the timing of things. And so I had many conversations with the project manager of the builder in terms of how we maintain the schedule with some of these delays, and they were always willing to look at multiple options and did put multiple options in place to help bring us back to where we were. So we lost some time. We lost about 5 weeks, but we probably clawed back a couple of weeks on that with some paralleling of activity.
Yeah, week delay. That's pretty amazing, if you ask me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Again, I've got zero complaints with our builder. I think I was watching, and we've all watched other developers with builders go through quite nightmare scenarios, and I just feel very grateful and fortunate that we haven't had to deal with that.
Yes, that's me still at the moment going through that. So it is very challenging, I have to say.
Yeah.
I feel get a good builder that works their way through it. That's fantastic.
It's gold. Absolutely.
All right. And are they all sold? Did you say that about to settle?
Yeah, they actually, so we did a pre-sales campaign. So part of our strategy right up front was we were going to pre-sell. And so we went to market pretty much the same week that we broke ground, which was March, April 2022, so a year ago. And we sold 4 of them within a few months, actually, of starting the project, breaking ground. And so the last one sold and exchanged a week before Christmas, just gone. So yeah, we got all those locked down, and then it was just a case of going straight into the settlement process when we got to that point. Yeah.
Okay, and then now what? I think you've got some bigger projects that you've taken on now.
Yeah. Now it's and again, this sort of plays to a little bit of the fact that I'm now out of my technology corporate career and into this full time. Organize my days and be productive instead of busy. But I've got 14 townhouses in a location about 3.5 hours north of Sydney, another coastal location, which been a very slow DA process. There's been a lot of going and backwards and forwards, a lot of engineering constraints, and added to that, we had to negotiate an easement, a 122-meter easement on an adjoining landowner's land. So I've had multiple conversations with that landowner. We've got an agreement, and but that took a lot of these things take a lot of time, and they just add everything to the overall timeline. So we're just about ready to go into DA. But the other challenge we've had is that because it's taken so long, I had the property under option. The option is due to expire in a couple of weeks' time. So I've been renegotiating the option for an extension on the option as well. So these things are all happening in parallel, and I'm trying to sort of land them in the right order so that we don't end up with a property we don't have any control over and a DA that they have.
And so how did you find that site? Were you using a buyer's agent again?
No, I've now sort of arrived at a place where I do my own research. So over the years, I've educated myself to the point where I have the information I need to make decisions around what areas to go to, and also the search tools available, and some of them are great now today, to be able to send letters and go through that process. So I do that myself. That's unsustainable in the long term, because I've already outsourced that part of it when I was working full time, or a part of that process. But yeah, I use on market as well, just to see obviously what the market's doing in the area. But my strong preference is always off market to negotiate an option. Yeah.
And did you say it was 14? So
this one's 14. Yeah.
The land subdivision, or are you doing?
No, it's not. It's not a land subdivision. It'll be the DA will be for the townhouses, which will be a strata development. Yeah.
And how big is the block?
4,044 square meters.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good project.
Yeah. No, it's a great project. We're very excited about this one and looking forward to seeing it progress. I think as of yesterday, we've got agreement for the option. There's just a few little tricky pieces to figure out with the extension, but and then this morning I made another offer on another site for possibly 12 units as well. So starting to accelerate now that I've got now that I don't have the tech consulting taking up and using the hours in my day.
Yes, I'm going to come back to that transition to full-time just in a moment. Was there another project that you said you had a 14 and a something else?
Yeah, the 12 that I've just put the offer in on this morning. I will leave that with the owners to ponder over the weekend, and we'll probably come back to a conversation next week and see if they're agreeable to what I've put in front of them.
Very good. Well, hopefully you can get that one across the line as well. It's always nice to have a pipeline of projects coming up. Keeps you focused and excited about what's in the future.
Yeah.
But let's have a chat about becoming full-time, because I know that's something that a lot of people are interested in that get into development. I get lots of questions about it. I actually have a module about it in my own online training course. Tell us about the transition. Did you start out wanting to be a full-time developer when you got into developing? Did you have a plan? Or what was the moment decided to go full-time? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. It is a great subject actually, because you do have a lot of conversations with people. I do as well. It's I think for me, after I'd sort of done the first development, I realized that it was definitely something I wanted to do. The idea of doing it full time, I think, probably took a little bit longer to manifest in terms of how that might kind of work, because when you've been working in an employment fashion for many years, there is that transition, which is why this is an interesting subject, because it's a mindset shift more than anything. But obviously, there's financial implications to it. So the last 5 years, I left permanent work, and for the last 5 years, I've been contracting and consulting in tech, purposely to kind of give myself a little bit of time in between contracts. So I may have done a 6-month contract or a 3-month consulting engagement, and then taken a month or a couple of months in between, and then done another one, and so on. So some of them have been back to back, but I've tried to stage them in that way over the last 5 years. And through the Stockton development, it sort of becomes apparent that you just can't do everything. And if you want to get into property development and you want to do it from a business perspective, which is what I do, something's got to give. And that's your corporate role, or whatever you've been doing, and you got to. But yeah, that transition is really around having the either the financials in place to support that, or some sort of mechanism to keep that going. So for me, the combination of Stockton coming to fruition, and also with the 14 about to go into DA, about to go into council, that accelerates that in terms of potential project management fees that I can extract. And I've also started doing a little bit of development management work for another couple of developers who are ultimately going to be my JV partners in this 14 townhouses. They've got a whole pipeline of projects, and I'm doing some work with them, which is another small, financial sort of reward, if you like. So it's kind of like, I guess, if I'd had a vision in my mind of being full-time property development, it was never clear enough to know what exactly it would look like from a financial perspective. I just knew that it had to be supported. And it just so happens that the consulting that I was doing previously came to an end. And it was kind of more of I'm just not going to go and do another one. And I'm going to focus on this, rather than a big celebration about now I'm a full-time property developer. It's a much more gradual, smoother, lower key process than you might expect,
And so did you have a cash flow plan in terms of generating fees and income, or did you take a bit of a leap?
Definitely got a cash flow plan in terms of fees, but there is also a bit of a leap. Yeah. So, if you were a bit more maybe conservative, you would probably go and do another contract. I don't mind taking a little bit of risk. That's the kind of industry we work in to some degree. You got to take a punt, and when you weigh it up, you kind of go, look, what's my time worth, right? What can I achieve with the hours in my day when I'm not being distracted by a technology consulting role, which can be quite consuming, and you got to kind of weigh it up and go, what can I do in that time? And how quickly can I accelerate things if I get that time back that I wouldn't normally have? So it's kind of like, you got to weigh up many, many things in the decision to go into full-time property development. And that includes your vision and your plan for where you see yourself in 12 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it might be. For me, this is a business. I fully intend for Aveline Property to be a bona fide property development business with a pipeline of projects both underway and at various phases in their in that process. So yeah, I've got a clear vision in that regard.
My view on that is I'd rather spend my time building my business and realizing my vision than using my time to do that for somebody else.
Yeah.
That's not to say that working for somebody else is a problem. It's up to each person to decide. But
yeah,
I'd rather use my time to build out my vision and realize the things that I want to do in my life. So that's why I do it. That's what I do.
Absolutely. And I think where you might struggle is if you don't have that vision, is if you're not clear on what is it you want to do. Because just saying you want to do property development is not enough. You've got to have more than that. There's got to be more meat on the bone to that. I think you've also got to be ready to leave the corporate world as well, because a lot of people have been in the corporate world for many years. Well, here's the irony, I think, of corporate world is that you think it's a safety net, but it's in fact not, because you're at the mercy of someone else.
No, I talk about that in my book, Nolan. I make that point. It's like things can happen, as we saw in COVID, and suddenly there's layoffs, corporate changes, and it's got nothing to do with you. Got nothing to do with you as a person or who you are and the job you do. It's just a decision that gets made at the upper echelons and you get cut.
That's it.
Like all the people that were working in hospitality and the arts during COVID, their jobs just disappeared. It didn't really have anything to do with them.
Yeah.
So there is risk there working for other people.
There is more than people, I think, recognize.
Which is funny because the banks really like people who work for other people because they get a regular paycheck. But anyway,
right.
You said there was a lot of it was to do around a mindset shift. So what was that shift?
Well, to some degree, what we were just talking about in terms of that kind of, that sort of safety net that you think is an employer, if you like, is part of it. But it's also, I would say, if I was to sort of sum it up, because it's quite complex, but for me, it really comes down to a few things, which are your motivation. So not just how motivated are you, but what is your motivation? Why your why. We talk about this. What's your why, right? So, but it's partly your motivation. It's partly there's a leap. And it may not be a leap because, you've probably done it gradually over time in terms of what are you capable of, right? So what's your capability? Development's, it's tough. It's not easy. And you do have to invariably solve multiple problems, some at the same time. And so if you're not that way inclined, if you get lost in problems, then you're probably doing yourself a disservice by getting into property development. So you've got to have some very clear understanding of your own capability and what you're capable of. And then I think the other one is really just coming back to what I said earlier about your vision. What is it you want to do with property development, right? So is it a vehicle for something in particular, or again, I've come across many developers who probably will only develop once, and they develop in their backyard. They've got a big block, they subdivide, build a house, and they're happy. That's it. I wouldn't call that a developer. So vision of where you're going with it, I think, is really important with this shift into it as a full-time gig. And the clarity around those three things, motivation, capability, and vision, I think for me are probably the things that I revolve around most in my mind around getting to this point. And those have probably been the strongest themes for me to realize where I am at this point. That would be, there's so many aspects to it. It's very complex, but those are the three key things, I think, for me.
And what about any challenges or unexpected things that have popped up since you've become full-time? Because I remember when I first came full-time and I thought all my dreams were going to come true when I started working full-time. And then a couple of months in, I'm like, oh, I still got all this crap I got to deal with. I've still got life, all the things.
Yeah.
So
It's
it's
funny.
definitely more fulfilling. I'll absolutely say that. But what about for you? Any unexpected challenges or things you didn't expect?
No, not really, not unexpected. No. And I think it. I think the biggest thing for me now, where moving into this full time, is that, like I said, there wasn't some grand plan where I said, right, on February the 27th, 2023, I'm going to leave corporate and become a full-time property developer. It just didn't. That was never kind of written down anywhere or anything like that. It just happened the way it happened, but it was always in a vision, right? So it's only been a very short space of time. It's allowed me to focus more intently on getting Stockton finished, which I would have done anyway, but it would have just been doing the 2 full-time jobs I've been doing for the last 3 years. And I think the biggest thing right now, to be honest with you, is just getting to working through what my day is going to look like. I want to kind of plan my day now that I'm out of corporate world, where people are putting meetings in your calendar and filling up your day with conversations which are quite meaningless most of the time. And so I've been going through a bit of a process of kind of thinking, and again, I'm not talking about rigidity here, but what loosely speaking, what does my day look like? I mean, it's like I've been reading the 5 a.m. Club, right? And they talk about the hour of power in the morning kind of thing, and I've been thinking, but it's like so it's kind of like putting a bit of structure into place to be productive. I said this earlier in the podcast. It's not about being busy; it's about being productive. So I want to make sure that I'm productive and not just busy. So it's about putting a few things in place to do that and make sure that I'm not just spinning wheels.
Yeah, it's a good book, The 5 a.m. Club. Have it on my recommended reading list for people who go through my training. Not because I think you need to get up at 5 a.m., but because there is some of those good models in there for what to do each day, which I think is very helpful and valuable to do.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Yeah.
And so is that your key advice to someone that might be looking to go full time? Work out what your vision and purpose is first?
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, it comes back to, what you've been doing, what job you've been doing, who you're working for, how long you've been working for them, are you permanent, are you contract? There's lots of different angles to it, right? But I think if it does come down to, you've gone through the process, you've done a couple of developments or at least one, and you've kind of landed on the I want to be a full-time developer, don't do it lightly. Do put a lot of thought to it. Do investigate what it means. Do explore. Do talk to people. As we were saying, part of this conversation we're having hopefully will help people understand a few things around that. But yeah, I think the advice is really just every situation is unique, but just make sure that you're very, very clear, 100% clear, well, as close to as 100% clear as you can be on your desire to do this as a full-time gig. Because, for a lot of people, there might not be any easy going back to whatever they were doing, right? I could easily pick up another contract next week, next month, probably next year, although it might be stretching it a bit then. But not everybody might have that luxury, right? So, I think it's important just to be very conscious of what you are, where you are, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what that means if you were to give that up. It's important.
Very good. Well, tell me, what have you learnt about yourself over the past couple of years, more related to your property development experience?
Yeah. It's interesting how I did a lot of leadership training when I was in corporate world. And, part of that leadership training when I led teams was about the stress response that you might have when you're in certain situations. There's a different response you will have when you're under stress to that which when you're not. And so um, from my corporate days, and there's a lot of stuff I've done in corporate world that's really useful, really handy. But I've been very conscious of that over the last couple of years in terms of how I respond to things and how I deal with people. Because the other big difference with property development is that in an organization, you might ask the accounts team or or the provisioning team or this team or that team to do something. It's very different in the world of development where you're working with consultants who have other clients. They don't work for you, and when you're under pressure and your response to things could be not what you either expect or you've never really thought about it. For me, I've really been conscious about managing my response to stress and how I deal with consultants and professionals. And that includes the architect in a way that's both respectful, but has a sense of urgency. And I think that in itself is a learned skill, right? And a learned skill that I would encourage anyone who wants to get into property development to think very closely about, because, being a squeaky wheel is one thing with consultants and what have you. But if you start to throw your weight around and act like a dick, you won't get the response you want. So that's been a big thing for me in terms of learning.
Well, you might get a result in the short term, but in the long term, the good people are not going to work with you when you behave like that, is my view.
Yeah.
Now, when I work with people who I mentor and help, one of the things I always like to work on with them is developing their standards and expectations.
Yeah.
So what are the things that are really important to you, so that when you do get into those hot situations, they're your North Star. And you can refer back to them and go, well, am I abiding by my standards and expectations that I've set for myself?
Yeah.
I am. Good. If I'm not, okay, I need to adjust my behavior or what I'm doing, because I've said that's not how I want to be. So, and I find that's a super valuable activity to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really, really important, Justin. And definitely, I would imagine, pivotal to your course, to be honest with you, because again, you would have heard this many times, but I've said this for many years, which is that property development is not, it's as much a people business as it is about property. In fact, probably more a people business. So if you don't have good people skills and you can't think about the what's in it for me, the whiffum that other people have, you're gonna come unstuck, I think.
Yeah, it's a numbers game first, and then it's all people and relationships.
Yeah, that's a fair
really
point.
What it boils down to. Can you get things done? And you need other people to help you, because you can't do it all. So how good are you at working with all those different people and getting things done?
Yeah, absolutely.
What about the best piece of advice you think you've ever been given?
I think 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that order. That's probably the first piece of advice I was ever given, actually. Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of mean that. It's kind of half joshing, really, but I do mean that. It's really important to listen. It's really important to, and this applies to anything. This is not just property development, but I can't remember which book it is now or who wrote it, but there was an author that wrote, a lot of people listen with the intent to reply. What they need to do is listen with the intent to understand. And there's a difference. there's a difference, because if you're having a conversation and you're thinking about what your reply is going to be to that person's sentences, then you're not really thinking about what it is that they're saying properly. So again, that's something which over the years I've tried to hone a little bit and get better at, and continue to, because it's a journey. It's definitely not a point in time where you're going to go, right, that's it, I've done my training on that now. So, and we're all victims of, being a bit brash and just thinking about our reply. We all do it. We're human beings. But I think if you can truly understand, if you can listen to understand, two ears and one mouth, and then that's the kind of analogy for me, which is, then I think you'll get more out of everything, to be honest.
I was going to make some wisecrack about marriages and relationships, but I thought better of it in that moment that I had to stop and think.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
Lucky my wife doesn't listen to the show. What about, you've taken yourself to the next level from doing a small project to a bigger project to an even bigger project. So what's your advice for someone who's listening who would like to do something similar? How do you get there?
Yeah, look, I think, the devil is in the detail, right? With everything you do in life, the devil is in the detail. And when you get into property development, it's very, very true. Now, I'm a big believer in education. I love the fact that you've got your course, Justin, and you're an educator. I'm a big believer in education. So keep learning, keep exploring, keep do paper trade deals. I've done hundreds of those, in terms of, pick a site, go through the process, imagine that you're going to bring this to fruition as a development, and think about all the things that could possibly happen, or you'd need to respond to, or you need to cover during that process, and do it on bigger developments, right? From a development management process, I've got the opportunity now to work on a Class 2 development, and that's another ball game entirely, having only done Class 1A. So it's, and again, for listeners of this show, it's, for Class 2 is, apartments and that type of building. So for me, I think the advice would be, just keep learning, keep exploring, keep digging, keep scratching. You've got to, the only way you can learn is by, education's one thing, but then you've got to go and put it into practice to really learn and embody that. Because until you actually go through the motions, it's still only going to have a certain impact from a mind growth perspective. So I think in terms of, or a growth mindset perspective. So it's important to learn, but it's important that if you want to, either go on to bigger projects or any project, that you actually go and find a project and do it and put it into practice.
Yeah, I always like to say that doesn't matter what happens to you, no one can take away your knowledge and wisdom that you acquire along the way. And it's the best investment you can make in yourself.
Absolutely. 100%. Love that.
Yeah, the returns are exponential over a lifetime.
Yeah, that's true.
And the name of the company, Aveline Property, so is there a story behind that?
There is a story behind that, actually. And that is that my sister, who's in the UK, she decided to trace our family tree. And she actually got as far back as the 16th century. And when you go that far back, you start seeing lots of different, obviously, channels coming off in terms of where families come from, and so on and so forth. One strand of our family was from France, and their name was Aveline, or as the French say, Aveline. So they came to England from France in the 18th century, met Thomas O'Keenan, one of my distant relatives from Ireland, and they got together in Shropshire, of all places. And so Aveline is a family name, and that's why I used it.
It's very nice to have some history there and a link back to your past as you look forward to the future. So that's nice.
Nicely put.
Where can people find out more about Aveline or about yourself, Nolan, if they're interested?
Yep. Well, got a website, avelineproperty.com. So you can go there, easily contactable through that. Social media, Facebook, doing a bit more on Facebook in terms of just tracking the projects and that sort of thing. So giving updates, etc. So I'll probably accelerate that a little bit moving forward. So connect with me on Facebook by all means. But I've got Aveline on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and the website now to sort of over time gradually build that presence. So yeah, that's the way to get in touch. Yeah.
Very good. Any last parting comments or things you'd like to mention before we round out the show?
No, look, I think we've covered a lot of ground, to be honest with you, mate. I think that I think just the clarity would be the main thing. Just, if you are interested in property development, if you haven't done anything, start small, learn the ropes a bit, do it in a way that's not going to hopefully break the bank too much. And, if it's something you think you want to do, but you haven't done it, you've got to give it a go, right? So you've got to try something to really know whether you like it or not. But yeah, just try and go through that process of gaining clarity if property development is something you want to get into, and through doing, you'll get that. That's probably the last bit of advice I would give.
Yes, you absolutely have to do a project to understand what property development's about. You can read all the books you want. Until the rubber hits the road, it's all theory.
That's it. That's right.
All right, Nolan, it's been awesome talking to you today. It's been great to have you on the podcast. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and thank you for sharing your insights. I'm sure people are going to really enjoy hearing about how you became a full-time developer and hopefully inspire some other people to make it across the chasm.
Yeah, I hope so, Justin. And thank you so much. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to come on your show. As I said to you before, I listen to it when I'm driving. I love listening to it. So I'll see if I love listening to myself so much. Probably not, but thank you. It's really grateful.
No, it's been my pleasure having you on the show. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and best wishes for the upcoming project. Hope you land that 12-unit deal.
Thank you. Same to you too with yours. Good luck.
See you later.
Thanks, mate.